remember, we found out that it wasn't, the identity was not in the genes, so that even if I clone identical nuclei, the net result of the two organisms are really related to the environment that these organisms confront. And so that the concept of making one, using the nucleus from one person and then putting that into an organism and getting a physical clone is pretty unlikely, especially when it relates to very, very specific details of behavior and identity and stuff like that. Where's the identity come from? That was the spiritual nature. And the fact that's real interesting is that on the surface of our cells are antennas that read the environment, and there's a special class of these antennas called self-receptors, and what they do is read identity. And so the point is, on your cells you have a series of antennas that resonate with some signal in the field. If I would cut those antennas off your cells, just the ones that recognize your identity, then the cells without those antennas are generic. I could put them into any human, and they would never be rejected by the immune system because they don't have any identity to them. And the point about it is this: I could take my cells, cut off my identity receptors, and put your receptors on my cell, your identity self-receptors, and then my cell actually becomes your cell.
So the antenna...
And I could therefore put my cells in your body as long as they have your identity receptors on the surface and they recognize the cell. Well, there's the fundamental, profound meaning behind all this, and the answer is the identity was not inherent in the cell. The identity was a signal that was picked up from the environment via these special antennas, and therefore the identity and the cell are two separate elements, and the identity is out there in the field, and the cell is just downloading the station. So the spiritual element is the identity of really who we are isn't genetically encoded per se. It's really some signal in the field.
Boy, that explains a lot. That really nicely explains the relationship between a soul and a physical body. And one wonders, well, what is it? Where does that interface happen? Like Stuart Hameroff at the University of Arizona in Tucson, we've talked with him and we're going, well, this kind of sphere in which we operate under quantum physics and then we operate under Newtonian physics here, where's the interface? How do you get from one to the other? And he was looking at the microtubules.
Yeah, that was an error. It turned out.
You're saying something more elegant, which is, okay, it's the antenna on the cell, and they're like radio transmitters and receivers, like we are to our environment in general.
Absolutely.
And then if they just tune into radio station Laura Lee, radio station Bruce Lipton, and they become that person. So the soul works through the soul, a field of vibration. It doesn't have to be material because it's a vibratory thing, because we know from quantum physics it's all sea vibration anyway. And then, so my signal feeds into my cells and say, okay, this is the body for Laura Lee. Let's go operate in this world, interact with all the other signals that are working through their physical bodies. That's brilliant. So we have a morphogenetic field.
Die, if your cells got killed,
I would still exist as
you would still exist because you're the
wave,
broadcast.
Vibration. Yeah.
The broadcast is not the physical body. And so all of a sudden it says, then the mechanism is really interesting, is that the two-way street, the communication where environmental signals come from the environment and are picked up by the antennas of the body, but then the behavior of the body is converted into electromagnetic fields by the brain and broadcast back out. So the point is the identity of who we are is not the physical body. We're not the body, but the body is a device that is like a virtual reality machine. When we tune into it, we can feel what the body feels, see what the body sees, and control and be involved with manipulating the behavior. But we are not the body itself. We're not the body.
Boy, and so that gets very exciting because we're all in telepathic communication between soul to cells. And I also think that if we have this communication set up where my cells of my body are tuning into the signal that is me, my soul, then at the same time, I could tune into higher states of consciousness or signal God. I think that's what happens when we have mystical experiences. We're just tuning into the channel
we let go
God
of the machine,
to the higher intelligence.
You do that meditation, or you get out of the body part and recognize you were never really in the body in the first place. You were outside and having the opportunity, and that's what I think is the most beautiful part of recognizing this is when you recognize it, what was the opportunity of getting into the body and having one? The answer was to experience this planet and to smell things and see things and hear things and taste things and to construct and to build and do all these things and to recognize that that the body is just the medium for the process. It isn't the self.
Right. This is just one journey among many that we're probably having out there as souls. Boy, and so the movie Matrix, I mean, that was so intriguing because at some point, I think it's really like that.
Well,
the projection that we think of reality is just simply that, a projection.
Exactly, and by changing our beliefs,
we change the rules.
We can immediately change
experience.
How we process our world and how we live in it and how we respond and everything. We have such finite control, but we're never taught that, and we're not given this understanding because we're always related to being these genetic automatons. And the reality is, it's a belief system that we're genetic automatons. And since the biology is a biology of belief, if you believe you are controlled by your genes, then you will manifest that reality. So people say, God, I got cancer running in my family, and they worry and they think, I'm going to get the cancer, I'm going to get it.
So the body complies and gives
it will absolutely conform to it. And the part about the body is, if you want to kill it, you can die, you can shut it off right now. And the part is, the cells will just do what you ask them to do. And the problem is, we never really are aware of that self-talk conversation that goes on in our heads that is always telling our body that we can't do things.
What do you suppose the health clinic of the future will look like if you can fast forward a couple of decades and if this knowledge is firmly put into place? What are the implications? What does the world look like? What does education look like? What does healthcare look like? What does human potential look like?
Oh, it's going to be such a wonderful modern change because we are evolving. Each step up the rung is different and in some way more evolved than the preceding one. So we go from here where we have a real understanding of technology, which is the material aspect, and we infuse it with our understanding of spirituality. And when you put those two together, which is energy and matter in that regard, and put it back to the balance point between spirit and matter and recognize the balance between the two, then this whole thing will change overnight. The planet will undergo similar to a spontaneous remission, will be healthy. As soon as our thoughts are healthy, the whole garden will return again. And so there may not be much in the way of clinics and health places in the future. In fact, most of the health will only be related around birth defects, because after that, you can control. It's controlled through the mind, so that we're going to really have a much healthier future. But we have to own and be responsible, and that's, of course, there's the weak link in the whole thing. We have to be responsible for our beliefs and our perception, which are selecting the genes.
I think that healthcare will still always be important, like in Chinese medicine. You get out of balance just by living. It drags you out of balance, and so you then spend some time getting back into balance. You spend some time reviving your chi or your life flow. If we understand that the life flow is all around us and we just merely tap into it through various practices or meditations or states of consciousness or prayer, what have you, then we're really nourished. It's like cows in a pasture. The nourishment's all around us. It's just a matter of imbibing it.
You're right. I think the interesting part about it is we will leave behind the pharmaceutical industry and go into energy. It'll all be energy healing at the end.
I don't know if it's going to all be, because if you have an accident, if I get run over by a truck, take me to a room, and I have a very short time in which to repair the system to sustain life. So I think there's always a place for everything. It's just how is it applied and when is it
trauma. I left out the word trauma. That's the one thing that medicine is good at, in fact, because it doesn't require a real understanding of how it works. It just requires an understanding of how to put all the pieces back together again. And that's the best part of medicine, because it understands the physical nature of a machine assembly to take parts in and put parts back out. But the problem that most of the problems that we're dealing with, that's why I separated birth defects, is that if you came here and you do have healthy genes and then something goes wrong, we really have to look at the programming of it and not to look at the physical genes themselves, because you've already demonstrated you got here with good genes. So there's two parts. You're right. There's actually a birth defect part. If you did have a genetic defect, then
because those random mutations go ahead and happen.
What's that?
Because those random mutations go ahead and happen.
Occasionally they happen, but there's a very small percent. So that we focus on that mutations are everything, but illness, 95% of illness has nothing to do with genes. So in the sense of gene manipulation or bad genes,